So I finally got my first mask. Are they mandated in Sac County yet?
They are not mandated.
Okay.
The only place I've heard of them being mandated is New York City, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, but some places are asking that you wear them.
Yeah. I feel like mine came a little late, but I finally, like later than I would have wanted to start wearing. But I got two from my friend who is making and selling them. And I told her to surprise me on the fabric, and she gave me leopard print. And you can't, the thing I don't like about it is like, haha, leopard print, right? I think it might be a Tiger King reference. I don't know.
But you just look like you're wearing some, like, you look like you stole, like you went to a hot tub party at some old lady's house and stole her underwear and you're wearing it on your face.
That's actually possibly where my friend got the fabric. But it's like, it's weirdly like dark enough that like you can't see it on me. You got to be this close. And once you're this close, I mean, we've got the Rona anyway.
No more physical distancing, right?
COVID time for you.
It's basically black, I guess. But I do really like it. I'm excited about it.
I have a buddy who he was making a bunch and he hit me up and was like, do you want one? And I was like, yeah, sure. I still have an N95 left over from the fires that I like dug out of a jacket I haven't worn since then. So that's what I've been doing up until now. But today, actually, it just came today. A buddy of mine who lives in San Luis Obispo sent me one, and it's like the Sacramento version, so it's a King's one.
I love it.
I haven't watched it yet, so I can't wear it, but yeah, it's coming.
And you're a huge sports fan.
I love it. Yeah, I'm the biggest sports guy.
love a good sport.
In radio, I would say.
Yeah.
I'm like you, Skylar. I have one left over from when we had the fires in, what was that, 2018?
October.
And but I got like a set of them, and then also one that is like reusable with like the removable filters. So it basically looks like Bane, but not Bane from like the Nolan brothers version. It's Bane from like the campy Adam West version. So it's like gray with like these pink filters on the side. And so it's both terrifying and adorable at the same time. So that's my mask.
What a lovely time we live in where we get to reuse during the global pandemic our N95 masks from when there was a massive fire cloud over Sacramento that brought our EQI up over 400 for 3 weeks.
Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yep.
Fantastic. I love it. It's that California lifestyle, man.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good for us.
Yeah. Well, that's a pretty high note to start the show on. You guys want to go?
Yeah, why not?
All right, let's do it.
Voices, the things they said. Voices, some from those dead. All the voices heard. Voices, things we say. Voices, they're in your head. All the voices heard.
Why, hello, everyone. You've got Kempa.
And Skylar.
And Flo.
And unfortunately, we do not have Shannon here tonight. She is not feeling well, but we wish her a speedy recovery. And don't worry, folks, it is not anything related to coronavirus. She will be back soon.
Shannon, come back. We need you. We miss you.
Very much.
Baby, come back.
But we are lucky today to have a special guest in Logan Dreher, a climate activist, right? A climate justice activist working with the Sunrise Movement as well as with Sacramento Democratic Socialists of America. Logan, how are you?
Yeah. I feel like that's a loaded question these days. I'm in my house still. Everything's still bad, but personally, I'm all right. Excited to be here tonight.
Good. I mean, we actually try to like regularly, sometimes these are the only times the hosts like catch up with each other. And so in real time, I think listeners end up hearing us talk to each other and like checking in emotionally. So how is everyone else?
I'm doing all right. The sunshine has been really helpful.
Good.
Yeah, I guess I'm doing not too bad. I go through like cycles where I have a lot of like creativity and like motivation to like create stuff, and then I go through cycles where I just don't have any, and I'm in the middle of a good one right now. So that usually is an indication that I'm doing better than not.
That's good.
Yeah.
I was doing pretty well until I went down, and we'll discuss this later, but covered that stay at home protests at the Capitol, and it just really stressed me out. It didn't matter if I was wearing a mask because these fucking people did not know how to keep their distance, and I like came home and just like bathed in Lysol effectively. Otherwise good.
Yikes.
Yeah.
And you were there too, Skylar, right?
Yeah, I was only there for like 20 minutes maybe, because I had a similar experience. I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit later on, but yeah, it was.
My question is,
it was a major bummer.
Were your 3 arrow tattoos showing in front of all?
Not only that, I wore my DSA shirt with that pattern on it as well, and like wore a black bandana over my N95 mask, and then showed up and didn't see anybody I knew, and was just standing in the middle of like 200 of these people, and was like, well, I didn't think this one all the way fucking through.
Yeah. I mean, even with a regular mask, you already look like the enemy because none of them were
Right.
wearing masks. Well, let's dive into something I think that's a little bit more, well, I guess this one's a toughie too, but I really appreciate seeing how many people rally around this issue, and it's the reason we have Logan on today. It is Climate Week. And, somehow, some way, the climate justice activists are making this happen, in spite of the fact that we all live in this new reality. So first, Logan, can you just like give us a little background on yourself, what got you into climate justice activism, and what it is you're doing these days?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up on the East Coast in Maryland, so new to California, and then went to school up in Rhode Island and moved out here with my partner about a year ago. So I'm pretty new to the whole Sacramento scene. I really started thinking about climate justice and liberation in general. And like in high school, I was probably about 15 or 16, and Black Lives Matter kind of just started exploding across the US. And it was really distant for a while, like I was watching stuff go down on the news, but I wasn't really paying that much attention. And then 2 things kind of happened. One was that Freddie Gray was killed in Baltimore, and I grew up in Maryland, so that was about an hour away from me, and that was really intense. And then I have this really specific memory. It's like really stayed with me, which is I was getting ready for school one morning, and my school was super early. So it was like 6 a.m. And I was making lunch or something and looking out at the news out of the corner of my eye. And I remember just seeing this face like flash up on the screen. And the headline, like, about a young Black boy that was killed by the police. And just for the second, because it was really early, because it was out of the corner of my eye, I thought that it was my cousin.
Oh God.
Yeah, my cousin, who was the same age. I thought that he had been shot and killed by the police. And there's just like this moment of absolute horror and like fear and terror, and realized it wasn't. It was Tamir Rice, who was killed by the police when he was 12 in Chicago. He just happened to look like my cousin. But that was really this moment that I started thinking about how, like, I cannot protect my family and the people I love, you know? I cannot keep them safe from the police, from so many other things. And that's really when I started thinking about climate change and climate justice too, because it's like climate change and what we're fighting for is about keeping the folks that we love safe and keeping the places that we love safe. And if we don't have clean air, if we don't have a safe place to live, like that's the most basic right that we need in order to keep our folks safe. And yeah, that was like the spark, that was the moment. And ever since, I've just been doing something related to environmental justice and climate justice work. That's what I got my degree in school. Now, full-time, I work at an environmental nonprofit called Grid Alternatives that does a lot of energy justice and energy access. And yeah, in my free time, pretty much every spare moment I have, I'm organizing with the Sunrise Movement and with DSA, just trying to win a livable future for myself and for folks that I love and care about.
You know, we read a piece that you'd written in Teen Vogue back in September, where you are discussing sort of the intersection between climate justice and gender justice. Is this something you think about a lot? I mean, you just now were tying climate justice in with, Black Lives Matter. Is this something that really fits as a whole spectrum to you when you come to approach things like this and just justice in general?
Yeah, I always get surprised when people are like, oh, I knew you did this article. I'm like, oh shit, you did your research. Yeah.
Also, Teen Vogue is dope. So.
Teen Vogue is down with the revolution. Like they are ready for it. But yeah, I think the way people experience anything is at the intersection of their lives and who they are. People, aren't blank canvases. And so when we're thinking about climate change and climate crises, it's always about where people are living and how they're living. And that's always informed by their identities. It's like, there's so many statistics, and I'm sure there's some of them that are quoted in that article about, what happens after Katrina, after Paradise, after these horrible, I don't want to call them natural disasters because they're not, right? What happens after these disasters to people who, are living in abusive homes and don't know, what happens to caregivers, what happens to folks who are unhoused. It's just, it feels really hard to me to separate out climate change from other kinds of structural violence because they're so interconnected and that's how people experience them, And the statistics speak to that. They show that women in particular, queer folks, like, first of all, they don't go to shelters when there are disasters, and when they do, they are assaulted in them. And they often, are more likely to die, more likely to be injured, just all of those horrible statistics. And so I think gender, race, class obviously is like the superstructural thing informing all of this. All of those things, it's how that speaks to how we experience these disasters.
Flo, I feel like this sort of correlates well with a lot of the work you do, and how racial disparities and poverty and things like that can create determinants that create negative and frightening outcomes for people of color, for women, for LGBT folks.
Absolutely. I mean, everything that Logan is saying is absolutely spot on, that we recognize that the people who are vulnerable when there's a climate event are the same people who are vulnerable every day because of structural, factors that, including racism and sexism and all the other ways in which we disenfranchise people. And so certainly, who's going to, right now, we have people staying at home. And as Logan mentioned, domestic violence doesn't stop just because there's a pandemic. And so who is most likely to call the police to ask for assistance? It's certainly not going to be people who are more afraid of state-sanctioned violence at the hands of police than they are then they feel that they're in need of help from those same people. So we certainly understand how that puts certain communities at higher risk.
Domestic, if I'm not mistaken, domestic violence has actually kind of shot through the roof during the coronavirus thing. Yeah, I mean, I like as a
suicide attempt.
Yeah.
So suicidal ideation, which often can correlate in some way to attempts. But the calls to the suicide hotline have significantly increased over the last month.
And that's always true after climate disasters, after Katrina, after lots of different climate disasters across the world. You can see really clearly that domestic abuse and violence really shoot up, in part because it's stressful. And when there's this pre-existing stress, when folks are losing their homes, losing their possessions, it causes a kind of friction. And exactly like you were saying, Flo, it's not a surprise who is most vulnerable. It's the folks who are always the most vulnerable.
Yeah. Can we dive into, I guess, we've spent all this time talking about the intersections. Let's dive into the climate space right now. Can you tell me about what it is Sunrise Movement is, what you are doing right now to fight this fight? I think most people remember that kind of iconic moment with Dianne Feinstein and the Sunrise Kids.
Jesus Christ.
Where they're saying, hey, we don't have time. We need, I believe they said, a Green New Deal.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, you want to make these changes, you run for office. And these are children. So
wasn't she, this is not related to that. Wasn't Dianne Feinstein also one of the people who just got busted for dumping the stocks when she heard about coronavirus?
She absolutely was.
She was.
Cool. Great. Good work,
and her
Dianne.
husband, I believe, sits on the UC Board of Regents and was just appointed for another term. And he's a late octogenarian. And I think the term he was appointed to was 7 years or 10 years or something egregiously long. And it's just how dare you sit and occupy the spaces and then say to children that they should run for office? You're not even letting other adults who are of age and eligible run for these offices and occupy these spaces.
Yep. So with that said, tell us about Sunrise and the fights you're doing. You're what you're trying to get done.
Yeah. So for some background, Sunrise Movement is a national organization of young people trying to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. And we really came up, I think, in a moment where we were watching sort of the older climate movement talk a lot about parts per million and polar bears and, specific scientific figures that are all important, but also don't speak to people's lived experiences of what climate change means. And then we were also, I think my generation, I'm 22, we're the people that have been talked about for so long. We have been talking about this since the 80s and 90s and saying future generations, our children, our children's children. And it's we're here now, it's me, I'm the person that people were talking about in the 90s and in the 80s. And, we're ordinary young people who have watched over and over our politicians fail us. We've watched Katrina, we've watched Paradise, we've watched so many other things that I could name right now, and seen basically nothing happen on climate justice. No one standing up to protect our future. And we're sick and tired of it, and that's really where Sunrise came from and our roots are, is we're not doing this anymore. And if the folks in power don't want to protect our future, then they need to step aside, because we are ready to do that for ourselves. And the way that the traditional climate movement has been talking about climate change and its solutions don't speak to us. They don't speak to our communities all the time. You know, we need to talk not just about climate change, but we need to talk about jobs and economic justice and racial justice. And I think that's really where, you know, when I was talking earlier about the intersectionality of the climate movement, that's really rooted in Sunrise's vision, is that the climate crisis has its roots in capitalism, in racism, and we have to be addressing all of those things at the same time, you know? And then I think we've also been much more willing to name our enemies. Like, we have enemies and they have addresses. They're a handful of fossil fuel billionaires who are trying to destroy the world for their profits. And we know exactly who they are. We know where they are. And we need to start calling them out. And I think the traditional climate movement wasn't always willing to do that.
100%. Yes.
Yeah. And we're like, all right, this is the point. We have 10 years. The International Panel on Climate Change said we have 10 years to radically transform our society. Like, why are we playing around? There's no need.
Yeah. You know, I like that we have as a guest covering this issue this week, a 22-year-old, you know, because the younger you are, the more adversely you're going to be affected by this shit. And it's, to me, there's nothing like seeing, you know, someone fresh out of college being like, nah, we're not going to shut the fuck up. Because this is our future. And like we're going to force this issue whether you like it or not. I also really love that you're not afraid to name an enemy, because I think that's a huge part of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think like part of what you're doing and kind of your focus on it seems that's inspiring to me, or that seems like it works for me, is I think for a lot of people, when they think of climate change, it's like this big nebulous problem that doesn't have like there's not like a specific thing that it's going to do, or like specific people that it will hurt. We don't know when it's going to be exactly and what's going to happen. And so people are just kind of like, well, that's too much to worry about. I'm not going to do it. Mm-hmm. But if you can kind of put it in front of people like, no, these are the people who will be hurt, and here's why. Like, it will reach out and touch all of us, you know? And I would think too that like this period when we're in the middle of this pandemic is like a good example to be like, dude, if this feels bad, fucking let's sleep on climate change for another 10, 15 years and then see what happens then, you know? Because this is, all of us having to stay in our houses for a few months is peanuts, you know, compared to what's coming if we don't get our act together, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I try to explain this sometimes. I think my mom sometimes gets tired of me talking about this to her, and I'm just like, Mom, like, you want to talk about pandemics? There are viruses trapped in the permafrost in the Arctic and Antarctica that we have not had to deal with for centuries that will be released when we pass a certain threshold. Like, there's the kind of shit that I think is just really unimaginable, and that's part of why people don't want to talk about this, because it just feels so unimaginable, so big and so apocalyptic. It's like, I can't focus on that. And at the same time, not to rail on the climate movement too much, but I think it feels dissident, you know, for us to be talking about the end of the world and the end of humanity. And then when we're asked what to do, it's like, oh, recycle, turn your lights off. It doesn't make sense to people. And people are smart. They can understand, if we're talking about the end of the world, why would turning my lights off make a difference? Right. And they're right that it's not. One person doing that will not. What will is when we have a movement strong enough to change everything about our economy and everything about the way that we're currently getting power and making our food and getting around.
There are particular corporations and particular people running them who are responsible for a huge, huge portion of the determinants for why climate is moving in this direction today.
Exactly.
Right. And I mean, I'd like you said too, like, you know, people hear things like, oh, you know, shut your power off or whatever. And it's like, dude, that's a drop in the bucket if we're talking about the end of the world. Like, what are you even talking to me about? And like, to a certain degree, they're right, because if these big corporations and you know, these big creators of waste are allowed to just proceed willy-nilly, then it doesn't matter if we shut our lights off or not, because we're like 5% of the fucking problem.
Flo, you had a question.
Yes. Logan, you introduced the concept of intersectionality, and I wanted to start by just giving you a chance to maybe explain to everybody what that means, because it's not a word that a lot of people hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So the term intersectionality was really coined by Black feminists, specifically Kimberly Crenshaw. And it's
Shout out.
you got to give credit to where credit is due. That's a feminist
Absolutely.
practice.
Hashtag fight Black women.
Yes. And so what it was really, she was defining it narrowly, kind of in a legal context. But really what it means is that for folks who have different identities, we kind of exist at the intersection of those identities. And so for Black women specifically, who it was coined to talk about, it's not just that we face sexism as women, and it's not just that we face racism as Black people, it's both at the same time. And that creates something new and different, you know? And so when we talk about structural violence and we talk about structural oppression, we can't just think of them as sort of separate things affecting separate people. We need to think about people who exist at the intersections, people who are affected by lots of different things. Because going back to what I was saying earlier about climate change, people are whole people. They live their lives in complicated and messy ways. And so when you're thinking about like a regular person who is, you know, a working class mom, she's not thinking about her life like, oh, this is sexism. You know, it's all of these different things at the same time. It's our economic system, it's racial violence, it's sexism, it's so many things at the same time. And intersectionality was really coined to talk about that. And then also to be thinking about, when we're thinking about fights for liberation, we have to be thinking about them with that framework in mind, that we need to be addressing all of them at the same time. Because if we're just out here trying to solve racism without thinking specifically, are we trying to solve racism for Black women? Are we trying to solve racism for queer Black people, for disabled Black people? You know, we have to come at it at the same time. Otherwise, you're not really out here trying to solve racism or out here for the liberation of all people, because you're not thinking about those intersections.
Absolutely. So you know, as you were talking, I was thinking about how this all kind of comes together. And one of the arguments I've been seeing lately is, you know, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but like, you know, there are people who want to open the country back up, right, and kind of go back to the norm. And, you know, one of the arguments has been made that since, you know, we found out who is being most impacted by this, and it happens to be Black and to a lesser extent brown people, that suddenly now it's not we're not all in this together anymore, and it's time for business to go back to usual. And so I'm curious to know what you think in terms of the climate movement. You know, the older climate movement you were talking about was also much whiter than the climate justice movement. Mm-hmm. And so what impact do you think that plays on how your message is received, and even what tactics are used, and also what your priorities are?
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I was thinking a little bit about, when I was thinking about this conversation, about the Yellow Vest movement, because something that they were saying during those protests in France was, we can't think about the end of the world, we're thinking about the end of the week. Like, if we can't pay our rent, we can't think about, you know, the end of the world. And I think it absolutely affects how I talk about, how folks in Sunrise and the climate justice movement are talking about, you know, solutions in particular, because there's a real difference. I think a lot of older folks who are older and whiter are oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes motivated by their grandchildren, by places that they love in the wilderness, you know, nature, a place that they love and care about. We all have something to lose from the climate crisis. That's just a fact, but we all don't stand to lose the same things, you know? And
absolutely.
So when we're talking about something like a Green New Deal, I think part of the reason why that language resonates with folks is because it's not just we're going to replace things. We need to ask people to sacrifice for the end of the world when they're already sacrificing so much. It's like we're thinking about climate change, and we're thinking about how to build a better world together, you know, a more just world, a more beautiful world. Let's build a positive vision together for people, not just talk about the end of the world and then talk about sacrificing something. You know, you need to eat less meat, you need to drive less, you need to do all these things that are less. I think in particular for people who are more involved in the climate justice movement now, they're often people who are already being asked to sacrifice so much, you know? It's like they're already people who are working class, who are racially marginalized, who are the most vulnerable. And that language of sacrifice just doesn't resonate, especially when it's coming from, you know, white folks who are like, you need to stop doing this so that we can have our nature and our grandkids will be fine, you know?
After they already enjoyed it for so long.
Right.
So I think that's also the thing. It's like people finally get a grasp of like, yay, I finally too can buy a gas guzzling, you know, car that I can drive around for luxury. And it's like, nope, sorry, now we need everybody to do the right thing. It's like, well, you got to enjoy it. And I finally am here, and I don't get to taste that, you know, that same, like, there's almost a privilege in the sacrifice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can we dive into Earth Week and what it is that's going to be going on? So what are some things that are going to be happening this week that, you know, a listener who's very interested in fighting this fight can partake in? Yeah.
So just to give a little bit of context, it's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day this Wednesday. The first Earth Day, 10% of the US population participated in some sort of march or civil disobedience, which is a mind-boggling statistic, like 10% of the whole population. And Sunrise, other youth and other climate justice organizations were planning huge youth strikes, huge marches and rallies. Obviously, part of the reason that we are involved in the climate movement is because we believe in science. And so now, because of public health, haven't been able to do that. So we've kind of taken to the digital streets and taken online. And so Wednesday, the 22nd, which is coming up, we're doing a climate chalk out. And what that means is we're just trying to cover Sacramento in chalk and other kinds of art about climate justice, about the need to bail out people and not corporations, and about the need for a Green New Deal now more than ever. And so folks who are interested, they should definitely chalk their driveways, chalk their neighborhoods. We have some online guides for how to make chalk at home, for what art to do, that kind of stuff. And then Thursday, we are doing some fundraising with Services Not Sweeps, which is an emerging coalition of housing advocates and direct service providers for unhoused folks in the Sacramento region. And we're going to be trying to raise money for them to provide direct services, and also to be doing advocacy to the city to stop sweeping in homeless encampments, because they are still doing that, despite lying about not having stopped. And
despite the CDC saying, stop.
Right, please don't do that anymore.
Correct. Don't get me started. So we'll be raising money for them on Thursday. And then on Friday, we're going to be doing a 12-hour live stream from 12 p.m. to midnight, featuring lots of different local activists and organizers and elected leaders, including Katie Valenzuela. And we're going to be talking about the climate justice fight, immigrant rights, indigenous solidarity, lots and lots of different stuff. Also just having some lighter content of like, you know, yoga and mindfulness that I'm really excited for. And so I would encourage folks to chime into that too if they're interested. And we'll be having some calls to action as well. And that's a lot of stuff, I know. So we have a website. It's, let me look at my notes, earthdaylivesac.org. And that's where a lot of this stuff is going to be posted. So if you're interested in any of that, I would go to earthdaylivesac.org and check it out.
For sure. We'll link to that in the show notes for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what a bummer that we can't have that big, I don't know, like the big Southside Park one that we have every year, which was actually the first time I ever ran into the DSA tent. So for the 2 DSA people on here today, like,
hey.
Shout out. Yeah. Any other questions on this?
Well, I mean, obviously this is a lot. Like we whenever we have guests on, we always kind of like to give our listeners like, you know, like something that they can do to express solidarity or to help the cause out. And I think you just outlined a whole bunch of stuff that they can do. But in addition, in addition to Earth Week, if there are people listening to this who are inspired by listening to you and who want to get involved, what's their best step? What's their best first step?
Yeah, so if you're a young person, which we define as under 35, join Sunrise.
All 3 of us.
Just missed it.
Right? Sorry, y'all. You can join as adult allies.
Be happy to be
I'm
allies.
not doing that. I can't.
I fully embrace my auntie status. I'm really excited about it. I get to be the person who, you know, has drinks for the young 20-somethings,
right,
and can order the takeout. So I'm happy I leave the 20-something, the being 20-something to the 20-something.
We need that. Yeah, if you're a youth, join Sunrise. You know, we really need every single person that we can get. We are up against maybe the most powerful industry in the history of the world, with a huge propaganda machine. And so our power is with our people. We need as many people as we can have. And if you are older than 35, like all these lovely people, feel free, like I said, to be an ally to Sunrise, or start looking at there's so many other movements. There's stuff like Mothers Out Front for parents, for folks who are thinking about climate justice through the lens of their children. There's DSA and our Eco-Socialism Committee. We're doing a lot of cool work locally. 350 here locally is pretty cool. They're doing a lot of stuff. They're also fighting for a Green New Deal. There are lots and lots of different organizations to get involved with. And I think seeking out any one of those locally would be great. Yeah,
I think this fight can really make strides in a place like Sacramento, in a state like California. So to me, it's just super exciting what it is you're doing.
I mean, we are the capital city of the 5th largest economy in the world. So
40 million people here. Yeah.
And California is one of the biggest oil producers in the US. I think people often forget about that because we have this really green reputation. But if you go down to Kern County, if you go down to LA County, there's a lot of oil pumping happening. And so what we do here has a huge impact.
Mm-hmm. And we could lead this fight. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? All right.
Oh, this was awesome.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on to discuss all of this. I mean, not just the climate element, but I think that a lot of people are going to learn a lot on the sort of intersectionality element. So that's, to me, that's really exciting. Logan, we are going to move on to one more topic, but if you are able to, we would like you to just stick around. And if you want to talk about this, I mean, particularly through the lens of these things we've already been talking about, I think there's plenty you could add here. So
Yeah, I'm down.
Great.
Awesome.
So Skylar, what did you do today?
Oh man. So I went to the MAGA rally or whatever. I guess it's not technically a MAGA rally, but it was kind of a MAGA rally at the Capitol.
The idea of the rally, the main thrust was to reopen the state, restart the
reopen
economy. California.
We're tired of being stuck in our homes. We want to be able to get haircuts and go to the movies and shit right now. So I wasn't gonna go because of the health risk involved of being in a huge group of people who aren't taking this thing very seriously.
Yeah. So this was down around Capitol Park for those listening.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm so sorry. Yeah. So this was at the Capitol today around at noon. So I live pretty close to there, and by nature of that fact, every time there's like any kind of MAGA rally or whatever, I head down there to counter protest and take pictures and do all of that. And I was sitting here and it was like, I can't remember if you texted me or if I texted you, but it was about like 5 minutes after noon and it was like, are you going to go?
I think
like,
you texted me.
Yeah.
And I live a half block from the park and I had already the helicopter over me and I heard all the honking and, and I was like, there was a part of me that was like, I should go cover it. But like, I really don't want to be around people like this. Like, I don't want to endanger myself or the people I love doing this. And I was like really fighting internally on what to do there.
What
well,
what
first
it comes
of all,
down,
Skylar, what you called it was much nicer than what I've been calling it all day, which is the rally of the White Citizens Council.
Oh, for sure. 100%. This is caucasity off the
I
chain.
think most people would prefer the MAGA rally to the rally of the White Citizens Council because given the number of Confederate flags that were headed down there, I was like, oh, I know what this is. Like, I watched Eyes on the Prize. I get it.
Yeah.
Like, I know what's coming.
Yeah, no, it's disgusting. And like, that's why I ended up going is because every time, because usually, I mean, and these guys are no different. They all came up from fucking LA or whatever, right? Like there was a big ass like,
caravan.
Yeah, caravan of these guys coming up. And usually it's like you go to these things, you know, they have like the MAGA rallies or whatever going on at the Capitol, and it's like 15 people from Placerville like dancing around in Trump capes and shit. And it's not a thing, you know, but I just kind of, dude, as a citizen like of this city and somebody who loves this city and the people who live here, dude, if I know those fucking chuds are like running around on my fucking streets, like blocks away from where I am, I have a really hard time to just stay in my house and fucking let them do it. Like the least I can do is fucking go out and take pictures and put these guys on the internet, out into public shame where they fucking belong.
Well, you didn't go out to do that surreptitiously, though. You went out in full gear where they would know where you landed.
Well, so I mean, another part of that is that when I go out to these things, I want people to look at me and be like, wow, that guy is not fucking pumped that we're here, right? I want people to like understand that they're not fucking welcome to come and do this shit at the capital of the city, or capital of the state, but you know, in the city that I live in. So yeah, I kind of went a little above and beyond, and I wore a DSA shirt that has like the anti-fascist arrows, like the 3 arrows pointing down in the circle, and then wore like a bandana over my N95 mask. Because normally at these things I show up and there's always like 20 people I know who are like across the street from the thing, and so it's like pretty safe usually. That was not the case today. I showed up in that shit today and was just all of a sudden standing in the middle of like 200 MAGA people, like in like an anti-fascist outfit, basically, that I was sitting there like, this felt like a good idea at the time, but this was a fucking bad idea to like roll out by myself wearing this shit. I mean, nobody fucked with me, so
yeah,
there was that. I mean, there's cops everywhere and shit, you know.
I never ran into you. So Capitol Park, for those listening, is like a 2-block by something like 5-block park. It's really big. And there were demonstrators, not just Most of them were gaggling down in the southwest corner at N and 10th, and then there were a bunch over at the West Steps, where I think they eventually held a rally. But there were also a lot that never left their vehicles, and their vehicles were all the way around the 1 mile of the park. They went down different streets as well. There were a lot of people there, and I was very surprised by that. I've never seen sort of a right-wing collection like that here.
Not on that scale. Not on that scale. Not even close.
Again, there's no way we can really know the full number. It's hard enough when there are a bunch of people just standing in a circle, like right by each other, that to estimate that. But this made it even harder to estimate.
I mean, but like hundreds, like easily hundreds of people. It was not
easily.
Yeah,
yes.
It was not like I said earlier, a lot of these things are like 20 idiots. This was not that. This was hundreds of people.
I went out to just document kind of how many there were, what they were doing. I did like a little live feed, and I had my mask on, but I just got to a point where it's like I got so stressed by the fact that none of these people were making any attempts to social distance. There were like little kids too, and I like. None of them were wearing masks either, and I finally just got
no one was. I don't think you can.
Out.
I think in this culture you can't wear a mask.
Right, exactly.
People will call you out.
To them, that's a contradiction. So I finally got so stressed out that I just went home and tried to relax for a while. But a few things there. I really want to talk about what I've seen. Flo, I don't know if you posted about this today, but a few of your friends have written about this. How during that Stephon Clark rally in the Fab 40s, the police presence there, the police fucking behavior there, and sort of like how the dichotomy between that and what we saw today with police presence and police behavior. So first, I guess, can I just paint the picture of the cops today? And then we can talk about what happened there that night. Today, I saw one Sac PD officer vehicle. There were, this is technically, if it's on Capitol Park, it's California Highway Patrol land. So that's their jurisdiction. So they had a few horses around, a few cops here and there, but they weren't doing any enforcement of any kind. I saw very, very, very few people. And the cops let them do literally everything they wanted.
Well, they had a permit, right?
They did get a permit.
They did have a permit.
Yeah, the CHPs gave them a permit. Which is the
first question, because I get that from a legal perspective, we have to respect people's right to protest. However, we are in a state of emergency, and we have said no gatherings of people, certainly not hundreds of people that are not practicing social distancing or physical distancing. So the question remains, like, they could have their rally, but you don't have to approve their rally today. Like, you could put them in a waiting list to have their rally in August or whenever you deem it appropriate to be able to have gatherings that large. So I just have a general question about how a permit for an event like that would even be approved. And if so, if we're approving protest, like, then can anybody put one in? Like, are we open for business now? I'm really confused.
No, not everyone can put one in, because the CHP are gonna approve fucking bullshit right-wing rallies, because a lot of the CHP are bullshit right-wingers, and that's fucking how that goes. Every time I go to a fucking protest, where
and that's in most law enforcement agencies.
Yeah, like law enforcement is
PD,
always going to side with those guys because they're
sheriffs.
fucking the cops are all right, like straight up. I mean, that's how that fucking works.
The governor's office, after the fact, said when people asked them, like, how did you allow that to happen, and they had barely any cops in place to enforce any sort of, social distancing measures. And they were like, well, they told us that there was just going to be a vehicle only protests, that none of them were going to come out of their cars. And there were hundreds of people gathered in very large crowds. There's no way that today ended without people getting coronavirus. There's no fucking way.
No.
Like, were you not paying attention to the other rallies where they said they were just going to be car protests and then everyone got out of their cars?
No, today was a tremendous failure of Sacramento leadership. I cannot fucking believe that the powers that be let these fucks run around in a group of hundreds of people and endanger the lives of everybody who lives in this fucking city.
Sacramento,
like it's fucking shameful.
And what happened to law enforcement is going to be breaking up and citing people?
Exactly.
What happened to that tone that we had days ago?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, like maybe if these guys had been like fucking burning a sideshow in the middle of fucking 10th Street or whatever, then maybe the cops would have showed up. Who the fuck knows?
So, Flo, let's compare what we just described today with what we saw the night of the protest. There was a protest after the district attorney of our county, Anne Marie Schubert, not only announced that they would not be prosecuting the cops who killed him in his grandmother's backyard and he was unarmed. Not only that, she spent the entire national press conference assassinating his character. There was a demonstration that week out in the Fab 40s, and you were there, and these are, Black Lives Matter protesters. Tell me what happened there.
Yeah, so that particular protest was put together by the Table Sacramento, and there were folks from Black Lives Matter and from a lot of other social justice groups that were there that night. The tenor was entirely different. Based on your description of it, I was not there today. I generally do not show up when the Confederate flags are out. But not that it's any safer than any other protest, but I definitely steer clear of those ones. But folks congregated in East Sacramento and were sort of zigzagging through the streets, and the police were out in full riot gear. There were tens of them. I'd probably say upwards of 70 to 80 officers at least. They were, threatening lethal force. When at the end of the protest, once everything was over and people were beginning to disperse, they essentially corralled a bunch of people onto the bridge and then arrested 84 people. They hit us with batons, they hit us with bicycles, and the city has had to pay out a suit. I want to say it was $50,000 in medical expenses and another $500,000 in payments to the people who were arrested that night. So I don't know if there's an admission of wrongdoing that goes along with that. Probably not. But they were incredibly aggressive. And it was not the same tenor that was taken at all today, based on what I've seen in video and what I've heard from people who've been there.
So I just want to accentuate that a little bit. So what Flo is describing is called kettling. And that's when when there's a bunch of protesters who are trying to disperse and the cops are giving disperse orders while at the same time congregating in such a way that makes it impossible for people to actually disperse. So then it puts everybody in the street in a position where they literally can't, it's impossible for them to comply with the disperse order. Correct. And they get assaulted and arrested. And this is correct. And that's 100% what these guys did.
They were actually redirecting people back in who had successfully gotten out of the kettling.
Yeah.
So there was a point at which I was in a car with 3 other people. We were trying to find a way around because we were trying to disperse. And I got out of the car because my car was over by Trader Joe's and asked an officer, and I'm sure this is recorded on his body camera, how do I get back over there? And he directed me directly into where the police were kettling people to try to go around. And I was like, I'm not going to fall for that. I'm going to go another way and around. And luckily was able to avoid being kettled and arrested that night. But it was terrifying. I mean, I had to take someone to the ER when we picked them up. After that, the police were, like I said,
he had his shoulder pulled out, right?
Absolutely. They were threatening, lethal force overhead with the helicopters, and they were hitting people with their bikes and batons when they were on sidewalks. It was not only unsafe, but it was really unconscionable.
I watched them hit you multiple times. Yeah. And I mean, you already said all of this, but I don't think I've seen, I don't know. I've seen a lot of protests in a lot of places. I don't think I've ever seen police behavior in a rich neighborhood, right? They call it the Fab 40s for a reason. At a protest like this, the way that I saw the police behave that night. And I don't know, man. It was some of the most monstrous shit on earth. And you look at that, and then you look at what happened today, and the fact that, the cops are like, oh, you know what? Let them exercise their First Amendment rights. Well, where the fuck were they? Where was that that night?
Exactly. It's not about that shit, man. The cops are like, fucking white supremacy is rife in the fucking police department. And it's obvious every time there's a protest one way or the other. If it's folks of color who are protesting for something, they get beat down and kettled. If it's fucking rednecks protesting for something, they get fucking escorts, Like, dude, I've been to plenty of these things where like shit gets ugly and the cops will fucking escort the alt-righters like to wherever they need to go. Like, hey, you guys aren't safe right now. Let's help you out and get you to a safe place. It's, dude, the double standard is, I mean, it would be laughable if it weren't so fucking infuriating because they're so fucking obvious about it.
It's incredibly blatant.
Yeah.
I mean, they showed up with a tank after the Moms for Housing in Oakland. Like, we know that there were children in that house. We're talking about what, like 4 Black mothers, and they bring a literal tank.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the most obvious and terrifying thing in the world. Why do they even need to have a tank?
And it's protecting interests of capital, and
100% of the time,
what lines that falls down,
Yep. Yeah. So the voice. Day. I'm just gonna go ahead and speak for all of us. The Voice's review for SAC PD is room for improvement.
Yeah, thank you. That Skylar is our resident cop.
0 stars. Do not recommend.
Yeah. No. Failing.
Would not purchase again.
Yeah. And my review of this rally is would not recommend. I wouldn't do it again.
No. Yeah, it was a real bummer. It did. It kind of wrecked my day. It fucked me up for a few hours after I got home because it's just so depressing to be in like a group of people who are that like willfully ignorant and stupid and like hateful and who just don't give a fucking shit about the people around them. It's just like being in that like concentration of that is like fucking really psychologically, I don't know, it's tenuous, I guess.
Yeah. Another thing that
it's also impressive that people can find ways to be that wrong on that many issues, right? Like you're just out here like, I mean, I think that's the definition of winning for losing. Like you just are insisting on doubling down on being wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like loud, proud ignorance is an American tradition. It's been going on for a real long time. That's a lot of us. I mean, here's the thing. So I'm going to lighten it up a little bit because I think we're about to be done.
Yeah.
The good news is that there's fucking way more of us than there are of them. The stats are something like 2/3 of Americans polled, or I think Californians polled, are actually afraid that the government will open up things up too soon. The people who would like the government to open up tomorrow, like these idiots, is like 20% or something like that. So we outnumber them more than 3 to 1. They're loud and they're stupid.
And Skylar, I'd be curious to know how many of those people who wanted to open up are just trying to figure out how they're going to pay their rent and mortgage. And if we took that off the table, how much that number would go down.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you there, but man, I just can't let anybody off. I can't let anybody off the hook. Like not even for that. Like it's like these guys are, it's unconscionable.
Yeah. Well, it's just there's an element of urgency for folks who have nothing. I think that's what Flo's talking about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, I get that. I'm just saying, like, I think, and maybe there are some of these guys out there, but to me, it's a lot of people who are like, I want to go to TCBY and get a fucking ice cream.
Sure.
I
think the people protesting for sure.
You know,
I think the people polled might be there might be a few people in there who are like, yeah, I wanted to open back up because my landlord just tracked my check from the federal government and is hounding me and I don't have enough money to get food this month too. Like, I do think there probably are some of those people in the poll numbers, but the people who are out protesting to open it back up are not those people.
Okay.
Yeah,
I misunderstood what you're saying. Then. Yeah, I think you're probably right then as far as the people polled go.
By the way, listeners, if your landlord did check your check through the IRS, they used your SSN and they should be going to prison. So, heads up.
That is illegal.
So
the cops probably won't help you with that. Also,
probably not.
So there's that.
But just call into us.
But hey, again, there's more of us than there are of them, guys.
Hey,
so we got that going.
But
we got the
point,
numbers.
Skylar, was that there's more of us than there are of them, and I think there are even probably more of us than are even being counted.
I love it. That's even more optimistic than my optimism.
So keep organizing.
Change.
Well, Dave, I don't know. I haven't been talking about this to a whole lot of people, but I think it's time that I let our listeners know. I'm unemployed right now, and I got all this time on my hands, man. And I've been at my computer. I've been reading all this great content. I've been listening to all this great voices content. But man, I mean, that was April, but what's going to get me through May? How am I going to get through May if I've already listened to and read all the great voices content? And if there's more, I would sure love to know where I can find it.
That's a good question. So we are existing in a few places right now. We currently have a website. It's voicesrivercity.com. It has currently, most recently, all of our podcasts, which, by the way, we are over 5,000 downloads. So hooray to that. This is also episode 50. So it's fun to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day with that too. So voicesrivercity.com, we have a lot of community voices, essays. I got time, so I might actually be doing some straight reporting at Voices. We do have some essays coming up by one of the 4 people on the screen is writing one of them, as well as another community member writing an important one that I don't want to give anything away on yet. But we are on Instagram now, and that's really fun. So at Voices River City, Twitter at Voices River City, Facebook Voices River City. We do have a Patreon page, patreon.com/Voices River City. If you don't have money, it's okay. If you do have $5 a month that you're not spending at the bar because the bars are closed right now, maybe consider helping independent journalism, because our industry is in trouble, and but we are growing here at Voices. So help us grow this thing, and I'm really excited about this whole project that we're doing. I am on Twitter at Kempa.
I'm Guillotine for you. That's Guillotine, the number 4, YOU.
And I'm Flojaune at FLOJAUNE.
Now, Logan, is there anywhere? Yeah.
Well, I am absolutely not on Twitter. Do not follow. Sorry, but yeah, I don't have anything to shout out. I guess you can follow Sunrise Sacramento, Sunrise MVMT SAC on Instagram or Twitter.
Great. And again, the website for Earth Week here in Sacramento is earthdaylivesac.org. Is that correct?
Yep.
Great.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise and all it is that you're doing. Thank you for fighting for a future for all of us. And thank you to Be Brave Bold Robot for your music as always. We had a beef 4 days ago, but I think it's cleaned up now with us.
Thank you all so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Also,
Yes,
so if
we
I want to
really
join up
appreciate
as a youth, are they gonna like card me? Like, can you get me through the door?
Sarah,
Yeah, I
don't
can get
be
you
the
in.
old dude trying
Can
to
you-
perpetrate a fraud.
Can you be like, I know him. He just
There's nothing
graduated high
sadder
school.
than that.
You can be like,
He's good. He's good.
yeah, walk
There's
in with a
nothing sadder than
skateboard
that.
and like have a backwards hat.
Hello,
like,
What do
fellow
you do?
youths.
yeah.
Being a stereotypical youth.
Yeah, we
Yo,
actually
yo,
check your
yo,
ID at the
what's
door, so I don't know about that.
Too many old weirdos trying to sneak in on the youth tip.
We're gonna start the
Seriously.
sunset movement and
Oh my God.
fight climate change.
I'm not ready to sunset yet. I'm only 2 years old.
All right, the
Goodness,
midday movement. I don't know.
Like, 50 before we start sunsetting?
The evening.
Yeah.
Right. High noon. Like that.
Sunset
The day is
movement.
over. We still have the rest of the day to look forward to.
You do like high noon. That's a little threatening too.
The
Yeah.
high noon movement.
Yeah.
I love
Do
it.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah, guys,
Yeah.
everybody stay safe, stay healthy, stay sane, and yeah, we'll talk to you on Friday.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.